Hi, I'm Peter Welch, President of the National Automobile Dealers Association. Our organization is entering its 100th year. In recognition of that extraordinary achievement, we're going to take a look at where we've been, how we got here, and where we're going. It all started with a bill before Congress, a few good men, and one voice. In early 1917, Congress was on the verge of declaring the automobile a luxury good and imposing a 5% luxury tax on their purchase. In response, a group of 30 auto dealers traveled to Washington to let their elected officials know that the automobile was not a toy of the rich, but a life-enhancing tool for average Americans. Those dealers, advocating on behalf of their customers, let Congress know that the automobile was a revolutionary transportation innovation and that it had become a necessity, and thanks to Henry Ford, an affordable one. The automobile has enabled past, current, and future generations to fulfill the American dream. Live where you want to live, go where you want to go. With that one voice, with that one moment in history, NADA was born. And 100 years later, we're still taking care of the transportation needs of our customers.
In the earliest days of the automobile, they were vehicles that only the wealthiest Americans could afford. Automobiles in the early 1900s ran well over $1,000, $2,000. Fairly simple machines, made to get you from one place to another, but they were extremely expensive. So only the wealthiest of Americans or anyone could really afford an automobile.
My grandfather started Shalom Motor Company in 1911. He was a blacksmith. This building was originally a blacksmith shop. When he got the franchise in 1911, they would bring cars in, Model Ts on box cars. And they would unload them off the box car just right across the street over here. They would have to reassemble partially. They weren't all together and anything. They come in a box. Like wheels and stuff like that wouldn't be on. In World War I, Ford actually stopped sending cars, stopped the franchise, and then after the war was over, they turned around and gave it back anyhow.
As we progress through time, obviously we have people like Henry Ford that have the passion to make automobiles that are affordable to the masses. And of course, Henry achieves that with the Model T Ford. That allows the majority of Americans to now start owning automobiles, driving them. Of course, once that happens, you now have the consumer also having new needs. And that forces the company producing the automobile to start thinking about, what do we need to do to make this automobile sell to more and more people. We've brought the price down, but now, people are wanting different things out of their automobile. So as we progress, in the 20s is when most Americans start actually owning automobiles, thanks to the Model T Ford and Chevrolet coming out with vehicles that are low priced. As we move into the late 20s, General Motors is the first to really look at the idea of styling the automobile for kind of general public. And in the 30s, General Motors stylized the automobile with a lot of curves and very flowing lines. Very sexy automobile caught people's eye. And GM quickly takes over the market lead, and other companies try to quickly follow by starting to stylize their automobiles. And then we hit the war, and that all stops because automotive production is halted for World War II.
Trucks that are the workhorses of today's mechanized forces, each will carry with it the perfection and endurance of General Motors workmen.
Depression was a tough time, so people were looking forward to coming out of that finally, and then the war hit. Even if you could afford to buy a car, there weren't any to buy because all our production capacity went into building tanks and planes and other equipment for the war.
That went into the making of automobiles. Trucks to keep our armed forces rolling on to Tokyo and Berlin.
Yes, 1940 it was just Chevrolet. My grandfather here, rather than be drafted, he decided I'm going to voluntarily sign up. But before he left for the war, he told his father, he said, we need to buy every single car that you possibly can afford. Because when the war's over, demand is going to be high and supply is going to be very low. During the time of the war, they retreaded tires, and they would drive used tires over to Ohio. They had a lot of the cars on cinder blocks, sold new tires, did maintenance, you know, the importance of service even back then as far as being the backbone to the business, as they say. So that was what they did, was service the vehicles out there, and tire sales that kept them going by a string.
Sports cars were still kind of a foreign thing after the war. Guys had seen those over in Europe. Ford and Chevy responded to that with the Corvette and with the Thunderbird out of Ford. Early 50s, the cars were big and had a soft ride to them, but that's what people wanted. They weren't worried too much about how many miles per gallon they were getting in that economy. Guys were making pretty good money and they could afford a car. They could afford 2 cars. And that's what was going on right after World War II.
It was the beginning of a new prosperity and a new culture called automania. For the generation of the 50s, anything was possible.
Car salesmen, get a bad rap, I suppose, and from the historical perspective. But the dealership was a place to go to. They had giveaways, they had brochures, events and so forth. That was a big deal. That's how important that transaction was. It was a family affair, man, buying that car.
A Volkswagen is never changed to make it look different, only to make it work better.
Late 50s, early 60s, you get the Volkswagen shows up. People began to see that those were actually a practical way to drive around. American companies weren't making cars quite that small yet, but it was in that period in the 60s when you get the Pontiac Tempest and you get the Ford Falcon. Those kind of cars begin to appear in the 1960s. The Falcon particularly was a cute little car, it wasn't much of an automobile, but it was good looking and it looked like a little sports car. But it's as we get into the 1970s when the issue of energy begins to raise its head, so to speak.
I remember as a youngster sitting in a car waiting a couple hours in a gas line. One of the dynamics that came out of that was the explosion in sales, or growth in sales, for some of the imports, such as Toyota, Honda, Nissan, which was Datsun at the time. It was the late 60s, early 70s when the first Honda and Toyotas were brought to the U.S.
Right before the first oil embargo in 1974, my brother and I opened a motorcycle store in 1972. We had acquired Honda motorcycles. We decided to write Honda a letter about selling the Honda cars. And a gentleman by the name of Tom Elliott, who eventually wound up being a executive vice president of American Honda, he came and interviewed me.
Simple. It works on the door.
And thank goodness that day I had a Honda t-shirt on when he showed up. 1976, we received our first Honda cars. From that point on, the business began to grow significantly.
70s, that was a very tough decade for our country. Chrysler took on debt, the interest rates continued going up, and were just astronomical at the time. And they got to a point where it was survival was out of the question for them without some assistance.
My excuse for coming to you is real simple. I'm running out of money, and I'm going to have to shut down.
My 2 daughters worked through the 08 period thinking that was really hard. And I told them, I says, this is nothing compared to what it was in 79, 80, and 81 when the interest rates were 18.5% to 20% on floor plan and we were struggling. I mean, that to me, there was a real financial crisis more than what 08 and 09 were.
2008 was interesting because, as you remember, the global financial crisis and things, really got worse from there. And as most dealerships or businesses do, we were planning our budgets at the end of the year, and we got to a point where we really didn't know what numbers to use because numbers are falling faster than we can kind of forecast, so to speak. So it was a very anxious time, I guess, in the business.
One of the other dynamics that came out of 2008, 2009 was that it forced dealers, not just automakers, but it forced dealers to become much more disciplined in their expenses. I think it shows that government and business can work hand in hand at times, even when businesses get sideways, whether it's their fault or whether it's just a fault of dynamics outside of their control.
One of the things that's so exciting about the auto business is this dynamic now of empowered customers with tools to be able to understand and get information and know about what your cost is and what's going on. They feel so much better about buying a car. And then the technology that's been developed. I mean, anybody that's driving a 10-year-old car is taking a big chance with the people that are riding in it. I mean, there's a sales pitch, but that's a real one. And that's going on, so that's exciting to see how much we can do with technology. And if you're actually talented and you don't have a college degree, you can be really successful with us. And we'll help you create a career inside our business and be able to grow and flourish. And an exciting business that has finance and insurance, has new car sales, used car sales, service, parts, and all the other adjunct administrative things that go with that. So there's a place for almost every skill set. So there's a huge pool of people that we can benefit them and they can benefit us by coming into the auto business.